if you gentlemen care to take a look inside, your incentive is inside the snout. Those are piggy banks. And you can come by and get one without the incentive included at our booth. What I want to talk about today is an investigation that our company undertook. My name is Scott Worthge. I work with a company out of Toronto, Canada called Quest Mindshare. B2B primarily, but also a lot of consumer panel and sample. We're a big sponsor of Quirks. Hopefully everyone saw the platinum sponsor right up there. You noticed. Good. Our marketing budget is not being wasted. So what we're doing is, along with our Quirks sponsorship, we get speaking slots. And about 6 months ago, when we were recording a couple of virtual presentations, we said to ourselves, wonderful, Quirk makes available to us a speaking slot. What are we going to talk about? And we said, we have no idea. What kind of things should we be thinking about as a company that supports lots and lots and lots of surveys? Well, our president, Greg Matheson, said, you know what? I've got a question that's been bugging me for a long time. He said, we support a ton of surveys out there, and I have no idea what happens to certain questions at different points in the survey. And I thought, Greg, I've been doing this almost 30 years as a quant survey guy. I've taught for UC Berkeley and Michigan State's grad program for about 5 years, and I have no idea what the answer to that question is. What kind of questions suffer? How do they suffer? Where do they suffer? Where do things fall off in a typical survey? And I said, how do we not know this? And I said, great, if we're going to do speeches on this, if we're going to build up any kind of experimentation, who else has done something before on this? It's such a broad and general topic, right? Respondents, surveys, fall off, data quality, which leads right into the insights that everyone for brand companies and research companies need to generate. But the foundation, where does the foundation crumble? How does it crumble? Does it crumble? So we said, we're going to build out a survey. And Greg said, okay, Scott, what do you want to do? Well, we needed to pick something kind of universal. We needed something pretty straightforward to investigate these main questions. This is what we're focusing on. And so what we really wanted to do is start exploring. We didn't know what we were going to find. We've now done 3 waves of this survey. So what we're going to talk about today is, what did we build originally? How have we adapted it over time? And where are we now for what we've been finding? And also some future directions that we've already been looking into, because in previous presentations, we're getting a lot of questions of, what about this? What about that? And where are you going to go with this question? I pick grocery shopping. I like building surveys. I'm geeky that way. I've done it, I've taught it, I like it. I know. Some people golf, some people build. But what we want to do is something that's pretty universal. We want to pick something that everybody knows about. And we would get a very kind of common response to that kind of survey. It doesn't require specialized knowledge or specialized experience. And so I thought, okay, grocery shopping. So that's, everybody's run grocery shopping studies here. Raise your hand. Anyone not run a grocery shopper survey? Okay, you're probably not in the survey company, right? You might be a reward.
But it's not a lot of consumer.
Oh, okay. Hey, you're our kind of guy. We do B2B. Come help. And we wanted to make sure that we had the typical representative audience. Primary grocery shoppers, the demographics, they're usually about 2/3 women, yada, yada, yada. We built that all out. We used about 750 as the sample number because it was on our own dime. And we said, fine, we'll go out to our panel, we'll do this exploration, we'll be able to get a pretty good incidence because of the activity in the base. The questions were important. What we built as our experimental design was introduction, screening, make sure we got the right shoppers, and all that kind of usual stuff that everybody would do for a grocery shopper study. Then we have a battery of 4 questions. We had a multi-select, a rating, a ranking, and an open-end. What we ask people about in the beginning, as you would in any grocery shop or study, is what categories of food do you buy? You've got produce and bread and pastries and meat and this and that. And then we picked a couple of those categories and we kept them the same. We didn't rotate them. Or we rotated, I should say, categories, but we didn't go on the whole list. Our experimental design was present one category and measure it about a minute into the survey with those 4 questions, the battery as we'll call it. Filler questions. Okay, tell us more about your shopping, and tell us about this, and tell us about, and do you use couponing? Relevant to grocery shopping, but it was really essentially just a delay, because then we asked the same battery of 4 questions later. We wanted to have the same questions presented the same way about a different category, and that's where we rotated the categories back and forth to get that comparability, remove a bias factor, primacy, recency, all of this stuff. And so what we really wanted to do is to say, as evenly as possible, what do the measurements look like? The 4 questions, a period of time, 4 more questions, a period of time, and on and on. The first thing that we really did in building all this out was, what should the experiment look like? How long a survey should we apply this to? Our first way was 15 minutes. And we did measurements in about 1, 8, and 15 minutes, and for that battery, with the filler in between. Well, what we found out is that between 1 and 8 minutes is where we were seeing all the activity, where we were seeing the drop off in what we're measuring, which I'll get to in just a minute. What we saw, how were we recording, what were the metrics. Well, we said, wait a minute, if really we see this, and then this, let's go back to the first 10 minutes. It wasn't 45 seconds. We got a little better sample than that, I think. But that's a good skeptical remark. 2 or 3 minutes, you guys got something already in mind here. So if we see a fall off at 2 or 3 minutes, I'll come back and make you earn your pig. Why do you say 3 minutes? Why do you think a respondent to a grocery shopping survey, something like that, would fall off a cliff within 3 minutes? Oh, what an insightful comment. I don't care about that survey that much, so why should I pay attention? Is that what you were saying? Yeah. And what was really interesting, for a different version and a longer period we had for an SMR presentation of the same thing, we actually got videos from panel respondents and asked them the same question, and they gave the same answer. We opened a can of worms here. Wait a minute, what are we doing in writing 20-minute surveys? It's somewhat necessary. You run a conjoint, you run certain types of things. They are not short surveys. But what we're really started out on is a pathway here to explore. And we're not done. We've got a lot of other things to take a look at. But what we're really trying to do is to say to ourselves, there should be a fundamental question all researchers are asking to advise clients. And if you're a client, you're writing your own surveys at certain points anyway. So for your brand, you're going to also need to take a look at it. Well, let's get some of the meat of the issue before I run out of time here. Within the first 10 minutes, that's the fall off. We'll see a couple graphs and some data. And anybody wants to talk to me later or ping me or whatever, I can give you some further details we won't have time to really dig into today. The rating question of multi-select. The simpler questions saw fall off, but less fall off. The rank sort question, a bigger gap, and I'll show you the gaps in just a moment here. Open ends. OMG, WTF. I've got some things to say about open ends. Now, we are working really off 2 data points. The methodological purist in me says, 2 data points, oh my God, what are you saying anything about results and conclusions? Well, what we're seeing here is trending. And that's all we really want to represent now, because we're not deep enough into this to really say, hey, we are concrete about this finding, but we think it's really interesting for the questions we started asking and the can of worms we're opening and where it's leading us, which we will continue. First of all, take a look at the overall time spent. Wave 1 is the blue bar. Wave 2 is the orange bar. This is the 4 questions in total. How much time did the respondent spend answering the battery that we set up? So you can see the drop off. You know, the second blue bar is shorter than the first, same for the LOI. So even though we have more absolute time spent the second go round, the second wave we had, the same fall off occurred in generally the same proportion. And a minute in, they were spending considerably more time on the 4 questions than 7 minutes into the survey. So there's your effect. There's your 2 to 3 minutes, and it's really starting to dip. Let's get into some more details that are more interesting. If that's the total, then what are the parts? What are the things that make up that sum of the 4 questions? How do the 4 types that we asked break down? We'll get to the open ends in a minute. If you take a look at the bottom 2, the rank sort and multi-punch, not that much different. These are measured in seconds. And so if you say, okay, the first time around compared to the second time around now, what did we see in the blue bar and really that second wave we ran after we had done some revisions, and now the third wave, the orange bar. You're seeing some drop off there, but it's not dramatic for the bottom 2. It's not really significant if something, in my mind, goes from 38 seconds to 30 seconds. But let's take a look at the others. This is our money slide. We start out essentially with the first battery of questions representing 100% of the respondents' attention. So whatever time they took for the first 4 questions, about a minute in, about grocery shopping, and how you buy produce or bread or meat products or whatever we were using for the particular measurement first off. What did it fall to by 7 minutes? Look at the percentages on the left-hand side. You see some of the simpler questions dropping off 10, 15, 20%. The bottom 2 lines, those are the 2 waves of open ends. 6 minutes into a survey, and your open ends suck. You're laughing. You know it though, don't you? You've seen it. You look at the word count and all that. Okay, well, I'll back up just a second and say, well, don't open ends always suck? Isn't it impossible? You're laughing too, I know. Because we've seen it. I've seen it for decades. You know, it's hard to get people to write. So we looked at what absolutely were they writing? How much time were they spending? What was the fall off from? Because percentages lie wonderfully, don't they? They were spending, especially in our second wave here, or the most recent wave, I should say, 70 seconds writing out the answer to the first open end. Over a minute for grocery shopping. Can you tell us what would make a better experience for you, blah, 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 that kind of question. And we got a minute for that first answer, so I think that's solid. It's not like they dashed something off and they spent a few seconds less the second time. They dropped by half. They went from essentially a minute to half a minute. 6 minutes later into the survey. To me, that says something. It's interesting enough that we said, okay, we think we've got something here. We think we really have enough that we want to keep exploring this and looking at it. Because again, we haven't seen someone come up with an answer. I mean, if anybody else here has done exploration of this area or knows anyone who has, we would love to hear about it. Well, we said if we're focusing on the open ends, if we're really taking a look at those being kind of the most affected by the respondent engagement drop-off, by the lack of attention that's being paid, we went back to look at wave 1, 2. We included that because we figured that let's normalize across the 3. Let's see what our trending looks like. And there you have it. There's the big drop-off. This is the other money slide. If you want to take a picture, or I'll send this to anybody who wants to come by our booth or ask me for it. Within 6 minutes, you're down to about half the attention paid. And again, we start up from a pretty solid base, I think. It wavers around a little bit, nothing significant there. The first survey, we then went out to 15 minutes, and I said, okay, to me, that later drop-off, that might just be survey fatigue. They're just getting bored by that time, or they say, I'm not that interested in grocery shopping, really, to spend more than 15 minutes. But we're going to be digging a lot more into that first 10 minutes, not just the open ends. We've had people say, how are you really analyzing the data itself? How are you looking at certain metrics of that? Why only grocery shoppers? Well, we wanted to build up some trending first. We had to have comparability between the foundation from 1 to 2 to 3, at least keep something the same. So where are we and what are we doing next? I think the real implications here, what we're focusing on, what we're really trying to pay attention to is, first, probably replicating this at least 1 or 2 more times, doing exactly as we did. I know when I was talking to the company management and we were discussing, well, should we change the survey around? And I said, no, we've got one we built, we made some adjustments, some of the labels, say for the categories, some of the amount of words we used in the descriptor were longer for one and shorter for another. And I thought maybe that introduced a bias for time spent. It took them longer to read them for a rank sort. I wanted to remove that kind of stuff. From 2 to 3, we did exactly the same survey. I'm going to be in London in a couple of weeks at the Works conference doing the same presentation. I might try to squeeze in another data set to compare to this and update the graphs and charts. But one of the key things we're looking at is writing surveys. What happens for certain types of questions and where you place them? It doesn't mean that you can only ask open ends in the very beginning, but what it means is if there's a known effect, we're not going to prove that anytime soon, but the data's trending that way. That's exactly what we're seeing. We've seen 2 waves come out almost identical for the fall off for all 4 types of questions. I said, okay, great. Well, it's 2 data points. Yeah, it's not enough to really say anything conclusive about, but we're going to do more of this. The other big request we've had is, okay, can you move beyond grocery shoppers? And we'll probably do that by the time we've got about 3 or 4 data sets here and say, great, that's one audience, that's one particular definition for consumer research, that's one investigation, but let's look at automobile buyers or other categories, beauty, home goods, whatever the case may be. Let's see if the results from a grocery shopper demographic translate fairly well into other consumer audiences. And because our company, Quest, is a B2B specialist, we have people clamoring for us to go into the B2B world and ask small business owners, purchasing agents, CFOs, the same kind of thing. Whole different kind of ball game there, but will the same effect show up? How different will it be for a B2B audience? So that's where we're going to be. That's where we're going to go. We thought this was interesting. I hope you have found this interesting, because it wasn't just for the sake of a presentation. But once our president asked that question, I thought, I've been doing this a really long time. I enjoy what I do. I find it really interesting every day for clients and surveys and research projects, all the new things that come across my desk. And I had no idea. I didn't know. If you made me guess, I would have said, as I thought originally, my null hypothesis was, yeah, people will probably stick with you for about 10, 12 minutes before they get too bored. That's why I was actually surprised by your 2 and 3 minutes. I'm thinking, okay, they maybe saw my SOMR presentation. No, good. But that tells you, if you're recognizing that there is a fall-off, if we all think that there will be a fall-off, what, where, who, how much? That's where we're going next. That's all I have for talking with you today. And I'd love to now open up for some questions and see what you have on your minds after this. And loudly, please, if you would.
Sure. So I thought this was really fascinating. So did you look at the responses for the open ends themselves? Because I'm almost, if you were to play devil's advocate or like stress test it, you might say, well, they're writing more, proper English by the end, and by the end they're just jotting it down, but substantively you're learning the same amount. So can you talk to them about that a little bit?
Yeah, you're looking at maybe some kind of language effects or semantic analysis and that type of thing.
Like they're still bored and trying to get it over with, but as the analyst, I'm still learning the same thing.
Oh, you're saying that maybe they're employing an economy of words because they've seen the question before.
I just wonder, right, I wonder if it was checked to see.
Yeah, kind of a familiarity effect. Yep, we looked into that a bit, but it doesn't, I think, explain enough of the gross difference in time. And that's why we thought this was worthy of presenting, because if it were 10 or 15 seconds that fell off of a minute, I would say, yeah, maybe the second time around it's like, oh, I've seen this question before, I'll still apply some diligence, but I won't write quite as much. But that gap instead of this gap is what we think we're seeing. Okay? Another question? No other question?
Right here, Scott.
Oh, now they all pop up. Oh, I'm sorry? You were waving at me, I'm sorry. You're over here with my bad peripheral vision.
That's okay. Did you include, or do you have plans to include any variation on incentivization and whether that has...
On what, I'm sorry?
Incentivization. Incentives.
Oh, varying the incentives?
Yeah.
Well, we kept everything the same for that as part of the foundational, kind of the caterers paribus, don't shift too many variables in one type of thing. So especially the second and third waves, we did everything exactly the same for incentives, invite timing, all the functional kind of process stuff as much as we could.
So one of the things I would suggest is, I don't believe this. My house is a big store, but my internal customers are like, just pay them more. We'll get them to do a longer interview, the data will be better. So I almost want, it would be great to see some data to see like paying people more does not increase the quality of the data or the intention.
I'm not immediately familiar with that, but the question was changing the incentive. I mean, can you get people to pay more attention simply because you're rewarding them more? There's probably a much, much more developed body of data on that. I'm not familiar with it off the top of my head to have said, oh, I've seen that. But that's a very good point. I appreciate that, and that's something that I'll file away for one of the variables we may end up testing down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I like bribing people. You see the big thing? I don't know if I made the joke. Did I make it earlier that you have now gone to a clerk's presentation and seen pigs fly?
Oh my God.
Okay, I say it.
Bad joke. Bad joke.
Maybe all the way over there.
Hi. So one of the things that I've been doing lately is actually integrating video responses instead of actual open-end responses, where like they can either go on video or they can do audio responses. And I was wondering if you're planning on adding that to
That is such a wonderful area. Her mention was of adding video open ends instead of just, of course, the writing. And I've got to tell you, that is one of my pet projects and loves in the world of research, is the whole area of video, captured video analysis. And I don't know if any of you know a company called Living Lens that now Medallia bought recently. And I used to work with a company called M4 that did all mobile surveys, and we captured a ton of video. And so I even taught at Michigan State. One of my classes was on emerging technology and particularly video. But that's an intriguing area that we could get to, but similarly with incentives is a bit of a tangent for right now. But that would, if we explore open ends very specifically, that's a very good suggestion. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, I will come back here.
So
We got about maybe 5 minutes? Oh, about 5 more. Okay.
So the question is whether you think there's a difference in expectation across devices. For example, if I'm saying I'm from a laptop, I would expect to give a longer answer versus on a device. If you were
Absolutely, yeah. Device differences, mobile versus laptop. We control for that in the first go around here by using only laptop respondents, no mobile. And so that's one of the factors that I was thinking about just for the device manipulation and looking at ranking and sorting and all that type of thing. So that would be maybe one of the evolutionary areas as well, especially if we're looking at different populations. And if we tie in even location services or video, you know, those are all areas I think of growth and evolution for what we're asking. But if you think about it, all the things that you're asking about, all the things that you're asking, what about this, what about this, what about this? They're all so fundamental to the same question of how do we engage respondents? How do we get their attention, keep their attention, but know maybe ahead of time some guidance on best practices for survey design, or recommending to clients or internal clients about, you know, you've got those 4 open ends at the end of the survey. Guess what's going to happen? This guy from Quest, I want you to talk to him. I would love to do that. I love telling people that, you know what? Watch out where you're going to fall off a cliff. And if you don't think you're going to fall off a cliff, I would be happy to give you all this. So you can tell people about it. And I'm sorry, was there a question that you had?
It's got answered.
Got answered. Anyone else? We've got a couple of minutes left.
What about in the samples that you've done, any generational differences, Gen Z, millennial, Gen X, in terms of their effective response?
Right now, no. That's an evolution for the audiences that I mentioned, because right now with a typical primary grocery shopper profile, we're not seeing more of the Gen Z and the younger cohort and those types of things, just because we haven't explored them. But that's one of those places that we want to go to say, as I mentioned, these are typical grocery shoppers, which are your 24 to 40, predominantly female, yada yada. And that's one of the things we've already got in mind about. Great, that's one population. Is that a hothouse flower, or does that underlie a lot of other things that a lot of other populations, a lot of audiences also will show? And I'm sorry, there was one over here. Oh, right next to each other?
So if you pull out one of your baseline, then you immediately launch you, because I was doing some sort of practice and kind of work. Okay, I've got cadence of the survey. I was curious, have you looked at that at all?
You know, I hadn't even thought about that. You know, the idea the gentleman was suggesting is that you do your screening, you ask about what categories they buy, you hit the first category with our battery of questions, and kind of without skipping a beat, you just get into, well, what about this next category? Which would seem a logical evolution in the survey for how somebody might be asked questions. If I were taking it, it would seem natural to me. I hadn't thought about putting them back to back and measuring something even that close together. That's a very good idea. I appreciate that. But right now, of course, we pushed it from 1 minute, 8 minute, 15 minutes to 1 and 7, and then did 1 and 7 again, just to see, are we going to get the same kind of data? But yeah, now it might be, well, between 1 and 7, is it really at 1 and 3? Is it 1 and 2? Is it 45 seconds? But that's a good thought too. These are wonderful ideas. I really appreciate your suggestion for some of this. Anything else? I think we're about due to wrap up. Yes?
What about like professional panel survey takers versus desktop?
What kind did you say?
Desktop, like just intercepts in a general population, not.
Oh, intercepts rather than a panel. We use what we had for right now. That would be something that if we were going to more of a river sampling or some kind of non-panel source, that would probably be later down the line. Because if I told my boss we have to go pay somebody for a sample and we're a sample company, it's probably not a good idea. But that also is a very good point about, again, is there bias in this that's going to then kind of like negate a lot of what we're saying? Really what we're looking at here is that we think rather than kind of wandering in the wilderness, we're starting to see a path develop. That's the point we're at. We don't see anything conclusive yet because we want to look at all the points that we're bringing up and really allow for that exploration to firm up what we're seeing around this topic. We just think it's really interesting and hopefully applicable to everybody in the room rather than a case study of us helping one company explore a shopper survey. We're doing it ourselves because we think it's important. Does it really benefit our panel and sample company? Not directly, but we think it's important for survey writers. And so that's why we're doing this exploration. Thank you for your time and attention today. Come talk to me in the future.